The truth is, I didn't start tearing up until I became a granddad, to be honest. Kids are all right, but grandchildren are wonderful. I was doing a message on joy during Christmas a few years ago. It was right after we became grandparents, and I realized grandchildren are the greatest biblical example we have of joy. You know, it's just always joy. Yesterday was a hard day of parenting for Nate. Courtney's out of town, and you know, they're 3 and not quite 2, and they were 3 and not quite 2 yesterday, and he had full responsibility, and I know it was not an easy day, and yet I was like, aren't they wonderful? They're just super kids. But so thank you, Zeb, for an excuse to come see my granddaughters. I love your church, though, and more than that, I love how you love our kids. I really do, and that means a lot to me. And faith and work, I love that. That's the next frontier for the church, and we've had seasons in Christian world where we did better at that than others, and this is one of those times. Walked in with somebody talking about C3 this morning, a group around here. You might ask about that, but that is a great frontier for the church, so I'm so appreciative of that. Well, I love the stories of David's mighty men. This is one of my favorite here in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And you don't have all these slides, okay? You'll know when you have them. They're on the sheet there. But 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 11 says this is towards the end of, these are some of David's last words, last days. But after him was Shammah, son of Agi, the Hararite. The Philistines had assembled in formation where there was a field full of lentils. The troops fled from the Philistines, but Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field, defended it, and struck down the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. I love Shammah. And the thing I love about Shammah is that Shammah stood in the middle of the field. And you know, that's what men of courage do. They stand in the middle of the field even when it's difficult. They don't stand on the sidelines. They're willing to do, and that's in the church as well. They're not the ones on the sidelines saying, why didn't y'all do it like this? They're in the middle of the field making things happen. But I think it's a fair question whenever I read this. This was a patch of lentils. In other words, beans. So Shammah made it to the Bible as one of David's mighty men for defending a patch of beans. That's pretty big deal there. Now, obviously, they're a food source. Plus, we've been told they're good for your heart. But he protected a bean field, and he's called a mighty man of God. I read one commentary that says Bible scholars have determined that this lentil field had no particular significance from a strategic military perspective. It was just a field of beans. Maybe that's why the rest of the Israelite army abandoned their defense of it. To them, it was literally a hill of beans. But it was something more to Shammah. He saw it as a symbol of what sustained his family. Those lentils represented the sustenance for his wife and children. Conceding the lentil field to the Philistines would compromise the welfare of his family. Consequently, Shammah was not going to budge an inch. He stood firm in the field and stayed engaged in the battle. And yet, here's what I'm seeing and why I think this matters so much. We don't have a lot of Shammahs in the church today. It seems to me we've quit training men to be men. Someone who can be strong and not be abusive. How many strong male characters do you see on sitcoms today? We make them the brunt of jokes. The concept of a manly man is made fun of these days. It's sad that we have a culture which makes it almost apologetic for a message to be just to men. One of my good friends, Nate would know him, is a U.S. congressman, and he was appointed, he's a military hero also, and so he was appointed to be the Secretary of the Army. And it came out that he had spoken to a men's retreat, specifically to men, and they used that to batter him so much that he had to withdraw his nomination. So thanks a lot, Nate. I'm no longer qualified to be Secretary of the Army. Right there, right? Please understand, I'm all for equal rights. Jesus elevated women to a social status they did not have. I've got 4 granddaughters now after raising 2 sons. And I hope they're given every opportunity they have to be the women God created them to be. I'm proud of the females who have stood up to abuse. God set the highest standard for mutual respect and submission in a marriage. And yet somewhere along the way, we've lost the art of manhood. We need men who will stand in the middle to be whom God designed them to be. The biblical picture of courage is making every effort to do what you believe to be right, even when the odds are stacked against you, even in spite of your fears. Courage is obedience under pressure. David Livingstone was a pioneer missionary to Africa when times were extremely difficult. And some friends wrote to him and said, "We would like to send other men to you. Have you found a good road into your area yet?" And Livingstone wrote back, "If you have men who will only come if they know there's a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there's no road at all." 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." And we need men, and of course women as well, who will stand firm in the call of God on their life in spite of the opposition of the world around them. So here's a secret, though, that I've learned well, and I learned it the hard way. It's true in family life, it's true in business, it's true in every other part of your life. I've served as an elected official, it's true in that as well. If you want to be successful, if you want to be a Shema, you have to first lead yourself. So I want to share a few ways to do that. This is where your notes will start if you choose to take them. I'm not the most detailed person, so I'll try to make sure these are filled in. If I don't, afterwards we'll get together. But let me pray for us, and then we'll fill in these notes. God, these are your people. And Lord, I don't know what I have to share. I don't even know who it's for, but you do. And so, Lord, you do what you do best. In Jesus' name, amen. The first one is simply this: make careful use of your time. Make careful use of your time. When Nate was in school, I'll share a few stories today of Nate, just because he's you'll want to know these things, and he'll want you to know them. But when Nate was in school, he wouldn't eat the school lunches. He was a little bit picky about some things, and so he wouldn't eat them. And because I'm the earliest riser in our house, it was my job to make his lunch. And he never wanted a lunch box. He just never was a conformist at all. And so he wanted a brown paper bag. That's just what he wanted. And so the lunch was the same every day. He didn't change very much. A frozen soft drink. I know they're not good for you, but we didn't know that back then. But you wrapped it in aluminum foil, you froze it the night before, and by lunchtime it was perfect temperature. And that went in the bottom. And he didn't like sandwiches. The bread got soggy, so we would do peanut butter and crackers every day. And I would make them. He didn't like the store-bought ones. And then the chips, again, I know it wasn't good for you, but... and some fruit snacks. That was his lunch every single day. And I would always put an apple or some sort of fruit. I knew he wouldn't eat it, but I knew he could trade it for something he wanted, right? And so here's the key. Everything had to be placed so perfectly in that in order for it to fit and still be able to fold the bag neatly over so that he could carry it. Imagine we finally went to plastic bags like that you get at the grocery store, but those don't work as well for the illustration. So stick with the brown paper bag, okay? But imagine your life is like that brown paper bag. What you put in it is very important, and you can only fit so much. We're busy people, and we're getting busier all the time. I read a book, In Search of Balance. It talked about a term, profusion. Profusion is simply the generalized phenomenon of more. It's more of everything. More books, more technology, more varieties of cereal at the grocery store, more chocolate. I mean, how many varieties of M&Ms do we need, right? more everything, whatever it is, more, it's called profusion. And then he shared a graph to illustrate how profusion impacts us, and he tracked it back 2,000 years since the birth of Christ. We have a graph. This is that graph. Look at that graph of profusion over time. And it makes it look like there was no profusion back in 500 or 1000 AD, but there was lots of change, lots of things. But so much profusion in a 30-year span that it made it look like there was no change at all those thousands of years before. And he claims the graph is mathematically correct. Think about the profusion in your own life, the last 30 years, the last 3 years. Technology was believed to make things easier. In fact, I read a book called Margins. I thought this was interesting. In 1967, testimony before a Senate committee claimed that by 1985, technology would allow people to work just 22 hours a week or 27 weeks a year. How did that turn out for you? Few of us sit around trying to figure out what we're going to do with all our free time, how we're going to use our leisure time. Instead of slowing down, we just keep adding more. Technology appears to make life easier, but it actually makes life more difficult. I saw this video about a year ago, and I love this. It's just so, it's so timely. But watch this. There's no volume to this. You just have to watch it. But this is a pit crew in 1950. That's a pretty mean sledgehammer, right? He's going to get it. I feel good about this. There he goes. Now, he's working as hard as he can. If only he had a little technology. You got to wonder what the driver's saying. Hurry up, hurry up. Now think about all the other cars, right? All right, there's another tire. We're getting close. All right. Come on, you can do it, buddy. There he goes. 2013. Sorry. It's freezing on you. There it goes. They're ready. They do a lot of time standing around. That's pretty good, isn't it? Those guys can go home now, right? So change is good, right? But think about the consequences of the explosion of profusion. Think about what's happened in your own life. We're more stressed than ever as a society. According to Business Insider, millennials and Gen Xers are significantly more stressed than the average population. 75% of adults are experiencing moderate to high levels of stress in the past month. Stress is the top health concern for U.S. teens between 9th and 12th grade. Psychologists say that if they don't get a handle on that, it's going to have serious lifelong complications for them. 18% of the U.S. population suffers from anxiety disorders. The cost to the U.S., more than $42 billion a year, almost 1/3 of the country's total mental health bill is just on anxiety. Johns Hopkins University reports unmanaged stress causes the thinking part of our brain to shut down. This is why you frequently draw a blank. I'm told that the COVID brain is a real thing. All of us are experiencing that. And here's three problems when anxiety is taking over your mind or when you have a cluttered mind. Your relationships suffer. Your wife says, aren't you listening, right? Your soul is cluttered, and ultimately the biggest deal is God is crowded out. The reality is how we pack the sacks of our life matters. The Bible addresses the need for a wise use of time. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. This is the first slide on the verse 15 says, pay careful attention then to how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. Psalm 90, verse 12 says, teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts. Psalm 90 goes on to talk about the shortness of life, how quickly life passes us by. And when you come to the realization just how short life is, you want to make the most of your days. So how do we do that? How do we make the most of our days? How do we define, how do we find balance? And I think a better word than balance is rhythm. How do we find rhythm in life? And I want to share 4 practical ways. This is the ABCD on your timeline for those of you who take notes. The first one, A, is do an assessment. Do a time assessment. Do a time assessment. The wording used in Ephesians 5:15 we looked at in the original language is very diligent. It's a methodical approach. Pay careful attention. It goes on to say in verse 16, making the most of your time. How do you make the most of your time? Well, you pay careful attention to the time that you spend. You're mostly in charge of the calendar you have in front of you that you work by. It may not feel like that, but you are. God gives us freedom over our time more than we think we do. There are obviously some things out of your control, but most of the clutter that we have in our life, that we have in our time and in our minds is self-induced. One of our younger staff members, I'm going through a book with them right now, and we've got about 12 staff members that are under the age of 30, and so I looked around and saw these young staff members, and I said, I need to invest in them. And so we're going through this book study, and one of the things that I'm telling them is if you have a problem, I want you to feel freedom to come and talk to me about that, and let's walk through that. So one of the younger staff members came to see me this past week, and she said, I'm just being pulled in so many directions. She said, I don't feel like I know what I'm supposed to be doing, and when I do, I don't know how to do it, and I'm just overwhelmed. And I said, well, let's figure that out. Let's first get your job description, make sure that you're doing what we thought you were supposed to be doing, and I allow people to help write their job description. So let's figure that out first, and then let's compare to some other. Her particular role, I hooked her up with some other churches that do similar roles, and y'all compare notes. But then she used that cultural word of the day. She said, "I just feel like I'm about to burn out," and I get that. And some of you, I realize I'm just slightly north of average age in the room, okay? So I get that. And some of you but some of you are younger. But let me just share something I shared with her. If you're facing burnout, I think as an organization, we should take that very seriously, and we should set parameters to help you as much as we can. But here's one thing you need to understand. No organization is going to completely protect you from burnout. It's not designed for that. It's designed to get a product produced or get the gospel out or whatever the outcome is. That's what that organization is designed to do, not necessarily to protect you from burnout. That's a lot on you. And I told her, we've created a system here where if it's 3:00 and you've done for the day and you just are you're just about to burn out, go home and start over the next day. I do that all the time. You're going to have to create that. Some days the best thing you can do is just start over. So keep in mind what you want out of your life. And what is your life, and where's your life out of rhythm? What about in your home? If you just examine this past week, how was the quality time with your family or with the people that you love the most? I learned with our boys, we couldn't plan teaching moments. We just couldn't do that. They had to come at the right time, at the right opportunity. And that required a sufficient amount of time with them. What about your work? Do you constantly feel overwhelmed? Do you carry that tension home with you so that your family feels that tension? All of us have seasons like that, but if that's every day and it's negatively impacting other areas of your life, you may need a new plan. My brother was career Navy, and he retired earlier than he could have. He retired at 27 years. He wanted to go to 30 because he had a high school senior that last year, and he took, okay, I'm going to be gone all the time, and you're about to graduate from high school. That was a hard choice, but he made it. One of our good friends got to the end of his military career. We grew up in a military town, but he got to the end of his military career, and he had opportunity to lead a department at West Point or go lead the ROTC program at a university. This was a lot more glamorous. This allowed him to make good choices for his family. It was hard decisions, but he made them for the right reasons. I'm not saying one was better than the other, but for him, this one was the better one. I always tell our teams, we have to get better before we can think about getting bigger. What about your personal life or your time with God is keeping you from accomplishing what you want to accomplish? You may say, well, my calendar's empty. I'm retired. I can do whatever I want. Well, let me just ask you this then. What do you do when you've got nothing to do? What do you think about when you've got nothing to do? Do you tend to worry or think negative thoughts? One of the things I tell our seniors all the time, the best thing you can do is turn off the news television and get that out of your mind for a little while because it's destroying you. You're not who you need to be because of that. You may need to find something else to do with your time. But to make careful use of our time, we have to ask ourselves hard questions. So first, start to assess the clutter. You got to know where you are before you can address where you're going. Here's the second. This is number B. You have to intentionally declutter. Once you find some places where you're out of rhythm, you have to begin to eliminate some clutter. You may remember the story, Luke chapter 10, verse 38. While they were traveling, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. Jesus said Martha was upset. He goes on to say she was upset by many things. And that's the thing about clutter in our minds. It's a combination of many things. It's not all bad stuff. Sometimes life is the balance of good choices, of many good choices. Again, there's nothing wrong with going to West Point. We need people to do that. Nothing wrong with doing the ROTC. Sometimes it's the balance of two good things. Even good stuff, though, can become a clutter if we allow it to. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says, but test all things and hold on to what is good. The word good there actually means valuable, of highest value, and you've got to determine that in your own life. No one can do that, but do that for you, but based on what you want to achieve in life, of all the good choices out there, what is the most valuable choice for you? And you have to do that in every area of your life. If you want to have a great family life, you have to consider your choices. If you want to grow in your walk with Christ, consider your choices. If you want a healthy soul, what are your choices? Ask yourself, of all the options, what is the most valuable thing for me? And you can't choose all of them or your life will be cluttered. Well, while you begin the elimination process, this next step is a must. Number C, learn the value of the word no. We've got to stop glamorizing busyness, and that's in the church also. You can be very busy and not be very holy. I know that's especially hard for some people, so let me just remind you, Jesus even commended it. In Matthew 5:37, Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no, right? Some of us have our yes down pretty well. I'm not sure we're clear enough sometimes on our no. Someone said no is a complete sentence. It's okay even to use in public. It's not a dirty word. No. Did you know it's even okay to tell your children no? Not your grandchildren, but it's okay to tell your children no. But if we want to declutter our life, we've got to learn the power of no. How many times have you said yes to something when everything in you was screaming no? Ultimately, it boils down to pleasing people. We don't want people disappointed in us. So it's easier to say yes when the most valuable answer may have been no. Now, I realize some of us have more problem with this than others. You feel if someone asks you to do something, you have an obligation, you have to say yes. It's biblical to help people, right? Consider other people's interests ahead of your own. Nathaniel gave Cheryl a book for Christmas a few years ago called The Best Yes, and I'm glad he did because I actually read it. I don't know if she's read it yet, but I did. No, she has. But she says this, the author, somehow I seem to have turned the meaning of Galatians 6:2, carry others' burdens, into a Messiah complex. Symbolically speaking, I am the Messiah and I got to carry it for them. This totally misconstrues the meaning of the verse. I am slowly learning to take these burdens to the Lord and allow Him to minister in ways that I cannot. It's amazing the weight lifted when you allow yourself the ability to say no. Listen, our attempt to please everyone usually ends up pleasing no one. And we find out that we're the most disappointed at our outcomes of everyone. And then the final suggestion for finding rhythm, and this may be the most important, it's number D there. Fourth, you must carefully plan your yes. You must carefully plan your yes. Everything's not a throwaway. You may need to add some things to your calendar in order to have better rhythm. And the reason you need to declutter is so that you can. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says He's made everything beautiful in its time. And the key there in that verse is in its time. Everything can be beautiful in its time. Part of living a cluttered-free life is learning when to say yes. What you say yes to is critically important to your soul. And it's also critically important to your relationships and to your family. As I said, the main problem with a cluttered life is your relationship with God suffers. You've got to have ample time to spend with the creator of your soul. And the best way to do that is to declutter your life. Well, here's number 2. We're moving on in our notes. Leading yourself. Number 2, don't compare yourself to others. Don't compare yourself to others. I have a friend who says in my 20s, I was the smartest person in the room. In my 30s, there were a few people around me almost as smart as me. In my 40s, I thought, wow, some of these people are smarter than me. And when I got to my 50s, I thought, why do they keep inviting me to this meeting? I don't know anything. I'm finishing out my 50s this year, so I'm wondering why you have me here, to be honest. But I've learned people are different. God has a unique calling and a plan for everyone. You're different. Your calling is different. God will use you uniquely. He hasn't made a mistake where He's allowed you to be right now. Proverbs 16:9 says, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. One of my life verses, one of my early mentors gave me. So I always say, copy principles, not practices. I'm going to share some specific principles today, especially next session that I'm with you. But don't copy them unless they work for your family. Copy principles, not practices. I'm going to share some practices. I think I said that wrong. The comparison game leads to men who don't stand firm in the middle of the field. In fact, I've seen 3 reasons men don't lead in their home. This is a subset under this number 2, but 3 reasons men don't lead in their home. 1, they think their wife can do it better. There's that comparison thing at work. Here's a tough question. Would your wife say you're leading well in the home? Are you guiding your family towards biblical truth and, even more important, modeling truth for them? Men are not likely to compete in areas where we don't think we can win. And so many men sit on the sidelines knowing their wives are more capable at it than they are. rather than trying to grow, and simply quit trying. They give up. The second reason is men may want to lead, they simply don't know how. You see you see men who seem to have it all together, and let me just give you a little insight from a 59-year-old. They don't either. They just act like they do. Unfortunately, many of us didn't have good role models. Maybe you didn't grow up with a father, and I didn't realize the impact. I grew up without a father. I'll share more of that next session, but I didn't realize the impact that had until I got into my 30s, and I had to start answering questions I wasn't prepared to answer. That's why we need men who will invest in others. That's why the church is so incredibly important. That's why what you're doing is so important. I wouldn't be who I am without the godly men in our church who invested in me when I was young. Don't be afraid to lead with what you know today and where God has equipped you. But the third reason has to do with the greatest fear for most men. It's the fear of failing. Guys don't like admitting we can't do something. That's often why we don't ask for directions, right? We're afraid of failing. But the fear of failure wastes valuable time and energy. Be who God designed you to be. I always tell my wife, Cheryl, you could have had funny or romantic. You can't have both. So she got funny. And I'm just joking. Obviously, our wives need romance at times too. But do I need to remind you, when you're at your weakest, God shows his strongest side? God reminded Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is perfected in weakness. And in my experience, God will sometimes intentionally allow us to feel underqualified so that we have to rely on him. Sometimes you don't feel you can lead because of the mistakes you've made in your past. You have guilt from previous failures. Whenever a guy goes through some moral failure or makes some mistake, maybe it's in the business world or wherever, they just kind of give up and go into their little shell because they're scarred by that pain of the past. And I've often had to look at men and say, look, don't be defined by a past that you don't intend to repeat. Your story is your story. You can't change that now. What are you going to do next? It's how you respond next that matters most. But lead yourself to surrender to his will for your life. Be obedient to his call on your life, and don't compare yourself to anyone else. Here's number 3 on our list. It's okay to invest in yourself. It's okay to invest in yourself. I know a man, I love this story. I know a man who never ate fried chicken legs, the whole time his family was growing up. It wasn't until his kids became adults and he went out to a restaurant and started ordering that he ordered chicken legs, and they're like, you don't like chicken legs. And he's like, well, I never ate them because they're the best piece. Well, he found out that his kids didn't even like the chicken legs. They just were the ones left, you know. It's okay to eat chicken legs. It's okay to eat the best piece. Sometimes you just have to invest in yourself. Do you know those airplane, and granted, some men don't need this advice, but they don't usually come to men's retreats, just being honest. But do you know the airplane announcements? If you spend any time flying commercially, you've likely heard this many times. In case of a loss of cabin pressure, yellow oxygen masks will deploy from the ceiling above you. To secure, pull the mask towards you, put the elastic strap around your head and fasten it till it covers your mouth and nose. Breathe normally, even if the bag does not inflate, oxygen is flowing. And what's the next line? Secure your own mask, that's right, before assisting others. Because if you aren't taking care of yourself, you won't be at your best. And you can't lead your family to be healthy if you're living an unhealthy lifestyle. The healthier you are physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially, the more health you can bring to others in your life. Put your mask on first. That's one reason I'm diligent about my exercise time. No matter how busy I am, I've learned if I can slip away and exercise, I just feel better. I'm less cluttered in my mind. That's a good yes for me. I have some monthly and regular meetings with men who give me life. They add value to me personally. That's a good yes. Saturday goes on my calendar before everything else. When the boys were home, they went on my calendar before everything else. Their ball games before everything else. Their practices before everything else. Even when I was a business owner I didn't go into ministry until later in life, a business owner and elected office and active in the church, they went on the calendar first because they were a good yes. And now Saturday goes on my calendar first. It's when Cheryl and I declutter and reconnect. And I'm not afraid to say to our church, and I would say this on behalf of my son, he didn't ask me to, invest in your family first because you want that to be there long after these people are gone. And so Cheryl goes there first, and I just say, look, we have other staff members that can look after you when things fall apart. And Saturday may not work for every pastor. That's what it works for me. We're a large church. In recent years, I've added mornings to my calendar. I don't come in the office as early as I used to because Cheryl and I walk in the morning so that we can unpack our day so that she knows what I'm going to be doing so that I can be better prepared for the day and she can be praying for me. It's a good yes. But there's got to be a time when you turn everything off. 3 John 1:2 says, Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. You gotta take care of your soul before you can take care of anyone else. Well, here's number 4. Lead with the end in mind. Lead with the end in mind. I had the experience several years ago that kind of changed the way I view my legacy. I was at a funeral for my grandmother. I had just completed the service. It's in the middle of Kansas, and I went to the grave site where all my family is outside this little Lutheran church. And I'd been there many times, but I had not really paid attention to all the gravestones of my family. And written on the tombstone of my great-grandparents, who I never knew. They immigrated from Germany. I'd never met them, gone long before I was born. But on that tombstone, written in German, were words I had to check with somebody who spoke German to make sure I was correct, but I was pretty sure. It was Philippians 1:21, for me to live as Christ and to die as great gain. And I realized my heritage was on both sides. I grew up in Tennessee with strong heritage, Christian heritage, but I realized on both sides I had a heritage of people who wanted to live for Christ. And at that moment, I wondered, what will I leave behind? What will my legacy be? Will I make it stronger? Will I leave something behind that they will want to follow? Consider these words. They're a simple life plan. I do a lot of life planning. I have some longer versions on my blog, but I just wanted to share one with you, simple 4 Ps that are here on your blank. The 4 Ps are simple. Purpose. What's the purpose of my life? Number 2, priorities. And whether you go top 1, 2 down below or 1, 2 straight across, it doesn't matter for this purpose, okay? What are the priorities of my life? Number 2. Number 3, plan. What's my plan to accomplish this? And number 4, practice. How are you going to carry this out? How are you going to do what you say you want to do? I learned something from watching my dad his last few years. I grew up without a father in the home. Most of my years when he was there, it was hard. Again, I'll share a little more about that next session. But he spent the last few years of his life trying to make right all the things he had done wrong. He lived so intentional his last few years. And I saw this in him. Someone once said to me, live your life so your wish you hads aren't bigger than your glad I dids. And my dad did that the last few years of his life. You're going to have regrets. Don't let them be the ones you could have avoided. You don't get to determine all that happens to you in your life, but you get to determine your reaction to it. So to decide today that you're going to lead your legacy, I want you to imagine with me just for a moment. It's a sunny day. It's a beautiful day. Suddenly you see what seems to be a church service. A crowd is starting to gather. They're singing worship songs. The preacher stands in front of the people to preach. Brothers and sisters, today we remember. And all of a sudden you realize this vision in front of you is not some regular church service. It's a funeral. And as you begin to listen, you realize this is not just any funeral. You realize this is your funeral. And follow the storyline out. How many people are there? Where's the service being held? More importantly, what do they say? An even better question is, what do you want them to say at your funeral? And then work your way backwards from there to build the life that you want to be remembered for. That's having a plan. That's having a vision for your life. You know, as a pastor, I've been on both sides of this. I've probably answered Nate's phone call when he's been on both sides of this. I've preached at funerals for people who served Christ so faithfully for many years. You just talked about one of those that you lost on the mission field recently. And maybe it wasn't even a church role, but they lived out their life, the fruit of the Spirit every day of their life, and it was evident to everyone. It was so easy to find words to pay tribute to them. But I've been on the other side too, where there was very little the family could even tell me about the person's walk with Christ, or even positive things they could say of how they treated other people. And I'm going to tell you, those are hard funerals to preach. The good thing is, if you're still breathing, you got a say in what happens on that day. If you want to make the list like Shema, be known as one who stood in the middle, be known as one who led your legacy. And the best way to leave a legacy is to give people something to follow. Let me pray.